mentioned it earlier in another podcast, but I started, or I applied to this short story challenge process, which is I think they had 6,000 applicants to it, and basically you get divvied up into groups and you get a genre. And one of
Yes.
those could
Is
be
that the New
romance.
York? Is that the
Yes.
New
Yeah.
York? Yes. Isn't that a
Mhm.
wonderful program?
Oh,
And yes,
I
I got,
got drama, and that was
did you?
like,
I got
oh God.
science fiction. And I was like, oh, okay. So then I just began interviewing my husband. I was like, so
Give me some pointers. What am I supposed to write about?
what are
Yeah.
we doing here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was fun. It was fun. It was a new experience. But I mean, if I get through to the next round, it could be romance. So I might actually be
That's
needing to
right.
do
Well,
your
I'm
workshop.
available on speed dial.
Alrighty, so I bet you our three listeners are rubbing their hands together saying,
Well, just us three.
I'm like, yeah, that checks out.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
right.
when is Anne going to give us these hot tips as to how to write tactful and non-cringeworthy spicy scenes? So let's jump into it. So, so Anne, in your workshops, you say, but before you begin crafting a spicy scene, there are two people to consider. That's yourself and the reader. So, what do you mean by that?
Well, first of all, as a writer, you don't have to write spicy scenes. You can close the door. Like, even if you're a romance writer, it is perfectly okay for you to stick to, sweet romance, where there's no need for spicy scenes. I think, as with real life sexual encounters, you need to be totally committed for it to work out. And I think, just check in with yourself. What's your motivation for doing this? Is it really something you want to do? Is it a skill that you would like to learn? Would you like to stretch yourself as a writer? Or are you doing it because you feel like you should, or you have to, or your genre, dictates that you should? So I think that's really important to check in with yourself, what you're comfortable with. And the other one is to think about who's reading it, because, if you think of 10 different types of readers, they're all going to have different tastes, different expectations. They'll find even just different language choices, more appealing or less. And so it's really important to have a clear picture. And it's not that, your book would only suit one type of reader, but I think it's really important to have a mental picture of who it is you're speaking to. And that then informs the way in which you do it. And I think if we each think about the day we've had today, and perhaps we go home and our partner says, "How was your day?" So you've got one response to that
Don't
person.
get me started. It's pretty typical.
But then say you go home and your 5-year-old child says, "How was your day?" So that's going to be a different response. It's still the same day. And then perhaps it's your grandmother who asks you, "How was your day?" So maybe, the expletives that you used with your partner are not in play with grandma. And so I think, it depends on the grandma. I mean, Harry,
Maybe
I don't know
not.
what's going on in your house.
Grandma could swear like a drunken sailor. You just never know.
That's right. I mean, I'm not here to judge. But I think, there's many ways to say the same thing. We've all had that one day at work. But depending on who we're telling about our day, we're going to use a completely different strategy, different language, different inflections, use of humor, whatever it is. And so that's what I like to get people beginning to think about with their writing with spicy scenes.
So it kind of leads me to, there's the next point I was going to ask you about, and I think it leads directly onto that, is about creating reader profiles. Is that,
yes.
Does that follow on from what you were just talking about? So once you start
Definitely.
thinking about your reader, starting to profile. So can you explain what you mean by that?
Yes. So in my workshop, one of the first exercises that we do is creating reader profiles. And so often when we start talking about a reader profile, people kind of get their marketing hat on and they start talking socioeconomics and, my ideal reader is aged 20 to 35 and, they hit this and that. And what I want to know is, what is her name? And so I might say, my ideal reader is Melissa. She is a heterosexual cis woman. She's married. She's 38 years old. She has 2 children under the age of 7. She reads these authors. She watches these television shows. She works in this type of job. And her pain points are this. And pain points are really, really interesting. So Melissa's pain points could be that she's time poor. She feels like she is way down the list of priorities. So it's her kids first, it's her husband, it's her job. Way down the bottom, it's her. She doesn't have enough time for me time. And, you know, and she's in a long-term relationship. So maybe some of that initial spark has faded. So by understanding Melissa, now we can visualize, and I think you both are sitting there visualizing the woman I've just described, which then makes it a little bit easier for you to begin to relate to her. And so if you tap into the pain points of being time poor, maybe she doesn't have like a massive budget to spend on herself, you know, she's got family commitments that come first. So, you know, if I'm crafting a spicy scene for her, I would want her to experience some sort of escapism, maybe some, you know, flutters that remind her of first love, you know, and a situation in which her pleasure is prioritized, like her wants and her needs, that she is at the top of that list, because in life she's halfway down, if not at the bottom. And I think when we start thinking about those things and we craft a scene around that knowledge, all of a sudden Melissa is reading this book and going, oh, yeah, okay. You know, and that is a really positive reader experience, because we've taken the time to understand who she is and what she might need, which is not to say that anyone else wouldn't enjoy the scene, but having that one reader in mind is really useful.
What if you have different profiles in mind? So again, rather than, you know, targeting to a very specific reader group, that's one profile. So Melissa's one profile. There might be another profile. Are you looking to try and find a happy medium that sort of covers off on, that addresses the needs of the different reader profiles?
I think if you've got one person in mind that you can hold, you know, in your thoughts, then that's going to really help shape things. It doesn't mean that others won't find the work interesting or enjoyable. It just helps to become your compass as the writer. There's a wonderful queer rom-com that's a massive blockbuster called Red, White and Royal Blue that you might have heard of. It's being made into, or it has been made into, a Netflix movie, I think. So it's a queer rom-com. And the premise is it's the President of the United States' son and a Prince of England. And it's an enemies to lovers. And so this is a gay rom-com, and the protagonist and the love interest are like 20-something glitterati. They're the it boys of their countries. And I am nothing like those two characters, and yet I couldn't get enough of it. And so, you know, you don't have to have an audience that matches, the protagonist exactly. I think there's still an ability to tap into people's pain points. There's that beautiful balance between universality and specificity. And so, you know, the specifics of what is going on may not have happened to me, but the feelings are universal. And so my empathy kicks in, and all of a sudden I'm right there, and I'm in that, you know, forbidden love affair myself.
I think this is where I've been going wrong all along, because I just write a book for me. So
you know what?
Trying to get somebody else inside my head is really difficult when I'm writing.
But don't you believe that being able to please yourself is of the utmost importance? Doesn't it all?
Well, you know, you've got to be careful what you say there. I'm not going to answer that one.
I think you know it's true, Harry.
Well, there we go.
We're going to take a short break.
I'm dying to ask this question. I don't want this to sort of be stereotyping genders, but I kind of sense that
Go on.
Go on, go for it,
this
go for it.
for
I've got a question later. Go on.
for blokey blokes who are writing, crime stories like us, like Harry
Yeah.
and I, we feel a bit uncomfortable writing this stuff. And why do you think that might be?
I don't know. I mean, what would Dr. Freud say? That's what I want to know. I think a lot of people find this uncomfortable and a little bit awkward, and and not to go full psychologist, but I suspect it stems from not being able to speak freely about sex as kids, of like having those wonderful, curious questions maybe shot down with awkwardness, or the feeling in the room changed when you asked your parents something or pointed something out. And I think we've got this kind of hangover of hang-ups from our parents. I think that this is, a taboo sort of no-go area. And I do not possess those reservations. I don't know why. But I think that, like, talking about spice and sex, and that is good conversational fodder. I think once you can move past the discomfort, it's just a rich wellspring from which to draw.
I think having a British background also sort of causes problems, because you don't show emotions.
That's right. The only thing stiff is the upper lip.
I remember my mom saying to my dad something along the lines of, "You need to have a talk with that boy." And he's sort of like, "Oh, good, I might learn something." And that was my sex education from my parents, full stop. So
yes, but I really think that these feelings of trepidation and squeamishness are because this is an area that we were not really permitted to talk or play in. But I'm here to set you free.
Thank you. And thank you. Amen to that. It's very liberating. So no, thank you. And we're going to take your advice on board. Now, I still want to pick your brains on a few more things. So we talked about, don't plonk a bonk, and don't just, chuck in a sex scene for the sake of it. But there might be, you've listed 3 reasons why a writer may want to use spicy scenes. And the first one is to actually move your story forward. I talked about, sometimes it might be perceived that it's kind of a bit of a roadblock in the progress of your story. It's kind of, okay, we get it. They're gonna have a, they're gonna have a bonk, and let's get on with the story. We don't need to know the ins and outs of it. But what we're saying, let's enjoy the experience.
No, well, yeah.
So for you, you're talking about this is also a way to move the story forward. So how does that happen?
Well, I think, with any scene, as writers, it's not enough that we want to write it. It needs to serve a purpose in the broader ecosystem of our story. And so, it needs to add value. It can't be something that can be removed or, without affecting anything. So, it needs to add value. We need to understand that the spicy encounter matters, that there's implications for the protagonist, for the love interest, that it's going to change things, it's going to lead to something else. As with any scene, you can't just write a scene, set at a car race because you like cars. It has to do something for your story.
Here's an interesting little question. I did do a bit of Googling on you, and I found read a bit on the old Goodreads stuff, and there was a phrase which I picked up on your latest book that's coming out this year, Me That You See, and it mentioned toxic masculinity. Now, the question I've got for you is, do you think that female writers get away, or can get away, or be judged differently to male writers? Because if I went and put in my book blurb that I was dealing with toxic femininity, I would probably get misogynistic claims or sort of aggression pointed my way in that respect.
So there's a reason that toxic femininity isn't a phrase in high rotation. You know, to sort of bring a more somber tone to the mood. I don't think that, you know, in the time that we've recorded this podcast, that there's been any murders, you know, of men by women in the home. I would hazard a guess, however, that women have lost their lives during this time. And so I think that, you know, if you were to use a phrase like toxic femininity, I do believe that there would be backlash.
Yeah.
And you know, I would say probably for good reason. It's a little bit like white people talking about racism. You know, that is not a burden under which you need to live. So it's not really your place to, you know, to use that in the battlefield.
I have lived in areas where I was the racial minority, so I know how it can feel.
Sure, yes, okay.
But obviously, I'll be very
yes,
careful if I was writing anything like that.
Indeed, indeed. And I'm all about good men. I am surrounded by good men in my life. I'm fortunate enough to, you know, to be able to say that. I really enjoy writing those wonderful male characters. But at the same time, in my new book, Me That You See, there's one particular character who is sort of the poster boy for toxic masculinity and entitlement. So this book is set against the backdrop of the online sex industry.
Right.
And he is just sort of a bad seed in an otherwise, you know, calm ocean, to mix metaphors. But yeah, I think it's sort of interesting subject matter. I, like most women, have a laundry list of, you know, things that have happened in my life. You know, when the Me Too movement sprang, you know, into being, and every woman on the planet put her hand up and said something like, this has happened to me. I just wanted to sort of capture those experiences and take inspiration from the things that I've lived. So my protagonist, Lexi, is a barista turned cam model, so an online sex worker. And when I was in my early 20s, I was a promotional model. It was sort of, you know, it was pre-online sex work. But I was one of those women who was paid to stand there and be pretty at places like the Melbourne Motor Show. And essentially, I was a body for hire. And the response that I received from men while being a body for hire was really interesting fodder to utilize in this modern day setting of online sex work, because there was two distinct camps of men. One was a very sort of sweet person who perhaps didn't have the confidence to speak to women, but knowing that I was required to stand there next to a car and smile and engage in conversation, you know, he would have enough confidence to have a chat. And that was delightful. I really reveled in those interactions because I felt that in showing him some courteousness and humanity, that perhaps he could take some of that confidence into his life and flourish. The other side, however, was those stereotypical bros who treat you like a piece of meat on a tray. And the tone with which they speak to you is different. You know, I would be sort of groped, turn around and not see who it was. People would want to take photos with us, and in the course of having a photo, you'd be groped. And I just really wanted to highlight in this book those two camps of men. And so I have this really beautiful relationship between one of Lexi's chat room visitors, who is a retired publisher, like an editor, who is On the other side of the world, he's English, and he is nursing his wife who is suffering from dementia. And really his presence in Lexi's chat room is a product of his loneliness and his need for connection. And then there's other characters that are more representative of that second group that I've told you about. And so I think I was just drawing on those years of experience to highlight all of it, I hope.
Yeah. But the point, or the sort of one of the things I was trying to point out or trying to sort of question was that as a male author, bringing it round, would you be judged differently writing sex scenes in a more chick lit sort of genre than a female author would be judged? And, you know, yes, it would be great to be able to have a fantastic sort of very sort of acceptable sex scene within one of my books, but the chances are if I got it wrong, I would be smashed for getting it wrong. Whereas I don't know if that would happen with a female author. I don't know. That's what I'm asking.
I don't know. Are we that beholden to cancel culture? I think you'd be okay. I think you'd be okay. Well, you know, you work with an editor, you'd have beta readers. I feel like there'd be checks and balances to protect you, Harry. I really feel like if this is the only thing holding you back, you should go for it.
Thank you for the